devastate the target wherever it is. I think what you're seeing today is that they have very precise weapons. If they fire at something, they're going to hit it. It's the exact opposite of what President Trump said the other day when he said, well, they're not very accurate. Nothing could be further from the truth. They're extremely accurate. And they don't have to fire as many missiles as they previously did to reach the target. And remember, they also fired a lot of missiles at the beginning of this thing in order to deplete the arsenal of anti-missile missiles, which were in Israel and the Gulf Emirates and states, as well as with the Navy at sea. And I think they've succeeded. I mean, I'm sure that we are getting close to the bottom. This is before we reload in great numbers. We started, I think, with roughly 8,000 missiles. I don't know where we are now. The Iranians started with 45,000 missiles. There's no evidence that they're about to run out. But what we're seeing are the best, the most accurate and devastating weapons. And I got to tell you that the engineers that I've spoken to here, and I've spoken previously to engineers in Israel that warned about this. I didn't understand at the time. This is back in 2020. But the engineers are saying that the achievements of the Iranians in missile technology are dramatic. They're impressive as hell. And everything they hit, they devastated. Now we're shipping, as you know, a THAAD radar, and I presume more THAAD missiles and launchers to Israel. I wonder what
the people think.
What?
From South Korea. You're talking about the ones they pulled out of South Korea. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think our position is a little less robust than President Trump and his administration would like us to believe. And I think the Iranians are being very careful now. They're looking at battle damage. They're examining it with drone footage, but also with satellite imagery. And they are now hitting things with a very specific purpose to fundamentally eliminate capabilities. I think they're also holding back to see what will happen in the near future. In other words, if we are stupid enough to attack Karg Island, which we've threatened to do, then they will launch, I think, everything that you can imagine against the oil infrastructure in the Gulf. They will, of course, push back any sort of restoration of the oil infrastructure for years. So I don't think that Iran is in a particularly bad shape. I think they've lost a lot of hospitals. They've lost schools. We've done a horrendous damage to Tehran. There's no question about it. But again, you know, this is Persia. This country's been around for 2,700 years. It's not going anywhere. It has no intention of surrendering or capitulating. Anybody who thinks so is crazy. And I think we bet very heavily on this business of internal uprising and revolt and readiness to throw out whoever is in charge. I think if we had stayed out and not bombed, perhaps by the fall of this year, we would have seen a different government. I think the Iranians are ready to move beyond the old Islamic Republic. All we've done is slow it down. We've retarded that development. I think it'll still happen at some point, but we've made it harder on the country to do what it would have done naturally without our interference. But here's the key. No matter who comes to power now, Mario, will hate us. We've done enormous damage. We are not going to have a friend in that country for a very, very long time.
So then we're kind of at a crossroad right now. It seems that we're at a fork, or Trump is at a fork right now. Either he seeks an off-ramp, which I think he, based on his speech, based on the way I've seen him think and act in you know, with Venezuela and you know, tacoing in other instances, China, Greenland, I think he's wise enough to seek an off-ramp and not admit defeat, but also, you know, twist it into a victory somehow. We've destroyed their nuclear program. We've destroyed their missile capabilities. But I've been the optimist for a while, even when we had a discussion after the 12-day war, and I'm like, this is not going to happen again. You told me it will. And I've been wrong time and time again. I never thought we'd be here. And the alternative that's being talked about is boots on the ground with a focus on Karg Island, which is where 90+% of the refining of Iranian oil happens. It just sounds disastrous to me with my limited experience. How would it look like if that does move ahead? Is there any scenario where boots on the ground makes sense in any way whatsoever?
No, not for us, not for the United States. Absolutely not. And Mario, we haven't got the so-called boots to send. Today's United States Army is a fraction of its former self. If you go back 30 years, 32, 33 years, we had 800,000 men in the Army. We were able to put 300,000 on the ground in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. We can't do that now. We don't have those forces. And remember, those forces also included Marines. And the Marines are very lightly equipped now. At least at that point, they could fight on land because they had a lot of artillery and tanks and other things. And then finally, you got to remember that we're not really equipped, trained, or prepared for the kind of warfare that we would confront. All you have to do is take a look at Eastern Ukraine and see how warfare has profoundly changed, to understand that any ground force is likely to be paralyzed unless it can gain control of the space above it. And that's a very difficult process. How do you annihilate, stop, and neutralize all of these drones that fly all over the place all the time, from the very smallest that carries perhaps a grenade to the very largest? We're not prepared for that. So if we were trying to do something like this, it probably wouldn't work out very well for us. I keep trying to get people to understand something else. They just don't get it. Today's satellite-based intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities, together with the collection devices that we have that are in the sort of terrestrial environment, mean that your opponent has pretty much persistent surveillance of everything on the ground that you do. That's very important. And because it means that, let us say we decided, well, we're very clever, we'll land on the Syrian coast because that's closer to, say, Iran. We don't have as far to march and move and so forth. Well, by the time you picked the harbor and started to bring in ships with equipment and brought in troops, you would be targeted with these missiles. They would do enormous damage. They'd kill thousands of men. In other words, how do you get out of the gate? You can't repeat what you did in 1990 and 91, this slow, ponderous buildup. It's not going to work. And then, despite the fact that I'm going to sound like a broken record, because I'm sure everybody else has said this, the notion of depending exclusively on air and naval power to achieve enduring strategic outcomes is absurd. I mean, we've been through this so many times, it doesn't work. All you do is normally make things worse, and I think that's what we've done. Now, the key thing, though, for you and for me and for everybody else to understand is something that Professor Morandi said recently. He said, we do not support the status quo. We are not going to live with the status quo. We will not live with an existential threat from Israel. We will not put up with countries across the Persian Gulf who are providing access, support, and assistance to our enemies. This is unacceptable. We need to understand that, because what he's effectively saying, Mario, is when this war ends, people like me who are Americans are out. We are not going to be allowed to reset bases in the Middle East. We're not going to be allowed to stage military power in the Middle East directed at Iran or anybody else. It's not going to happen. How can we accept that? I think we can accept it very easily because I have a different perspective. I think the world is better off when we're not basing troops on foreign soil. I've never liked it. I think it's a bad idea. I'm happy to get out. But in Washington, where everything is mortgaged to vanity, especially with the president, how does he accept that without saying, well, we've been defeated?
I just don't see a scenario where American troops were put out of the Gulf. Like, things must go so wrong for the US. I know they're already going wrong to an extent, but I mean, significant more damage being caused. Because I think while it's not going well for the US, Iran is being pummeled as well. You know, we're seeing over 5,500 targets struck, and Israel's going to take it to another level. They've struck their oil facilities. You saw the acid oil rain, which is just, I don't know how anyone in the world is okay with this, but there's something that Israel did, Colonel, I want to get your thoughts on. And they struck an Iranian desalination plant, a water purification plant. That was very bizarre for me because Iran doesn't really need it. They've got over 30 of them. They've also got a lot of rivers. They've got a lot of sources for water. The Gulf need those desalination plants. And if Iran responds in kind, which they've done previously, and they've already struck, I think, one in Bahrain or Qatar, if they strike desalination plants in the Gulf, then we're in a pretty scary situation where they could start to choke off the Gulf from a necessity, not a nice to have, but a necessity for the people there. My question to you is, why did Israel strike the oil depots? Why did, without American approval, according to reports, why did they strike a desalination plant in Iran? And why did the Jerusalem Post put out a false story and piss off the Emirates by saying the UAE is striking Iranian targets when the UAE was not doing so and there was no reports of them doing so? Is it the obvious? I know I'm asking kind of a rhetorical question. Is Israel just trying to drag the US in a prolonged war? And to what extent?
Oh, I think that's very true. I think they would like to have us in a state of perpetual warfare with the enemies of Israel. That's their view. But you need to come to terms with the reality. The Israelis don't care about anybody in the Gulf. They could care less. They don't care about anybody who is not a Jew. Let's be frank. This is the state of Jewish supremacy. This is a war of Jewish supremacy. How many times do you have to listen to someone like Netanyahu or Ben-Gvir or a host of other people tell you that? At some point, you have to take people at their word, believe what they are saying. And they don't give a damn about us. We are only useful insofar as that they can employ our military power at will in support of their goals. Is it in our interest to destroy the Iranian nation state? No, we have no interest in that. Why would we be interested in doing a thing like that? We want to trade. Trade is the lifeblood of our nation. We are a commercial state. We're not some sort of totalitarian Soviet Union that walls itself off and then tries to impose new communist regimes in other states. That's all nonsense. Israel is interested in one thing, Israel. And if Israel has to sacrifice millions of people in order for it to feel safe, in order for it to dominate the region, that is exactly what Israel will do. Now, inside the United States, this truth is finally beginning to be felt. People are beginning to figure this out. And they're asking the question, what are we doing? What is this for? Why would we implement a draft and raise 1 million men and then move them 6,000 miles from the United States to attack people in Iran? People are asking that. What's the reason? What's the strategic purpose? Was Iran a threat to us? And people know that's not true. We've been listening to all of these lies for years. Oh, the Iranians are 2 weeks from a nuclear weapon. Iran's been 2 weeks from a nuclear weapon for at least 30 years. And by the way, if they get a nuclear weapon, they're going to nuke America. What? Why? Is there a particular reason for that? No. And remember, historically, when we went into the Gulf, we said our purpose there was to permit commercial traffic. In other words, to facilitate it, to protect it, to encourage it, not to stop it. But then under tremendous pressure from the Israeli lobby in the United States and the Zionist billionaires that back it and Israel itself, we finally decided, all right, we'll go to war and we'll get the deal that you want. We'll emasculate Iran. We'll make them bow to your interests and what you want. After all, that's happened in the Gulf. That's what the Gulf states have done. Effectively, Saudi Arabia has done that. Has anyone ridden to the rescue of the Palestinians who are being murdered or expelled from their homes? Has the Egyptian army said we have a moral obligation to our brothers to cross Israel's border and protect all of these people who are being driven from their homes and killed? No. What about the Turks? What about the Turks? There's the 500-pound gorilla in the room. The largest army in NATO, a powerful state, supposedly Muslim, supposedly feeling solidarity with Muslims everywhere. And what have they done? Nothing. And Syria, what's happened in Syria? We removed the moderate who actually ran the country and essentially tolerated Shiites, Jews, Armenians, Christians. We got rid of him. We replaced him with an ISIS al-Qaeda alumnus. That suits Mr. Netanyahu. That seems to suit Mr. Erdogan. But now we see the Israelis moving north in Lebanon. Eventually, the Israelis are going to move north in Syria. What will the Turks do at that point? The only nation state in the region that has said no thank you to Israel is Iran. And so it had to be attacked. It had to be destroyed. Only it refuses to be destroyed, and it refuses to capitulate. That's the stark truth.
What happens if Trump seeks an off-ramp and Iran refuses that?
Well,
They want to continue the war, as we said to the
no, thank you. Iran has already said we are not going to negotiate.
They have.
Forget it. You've had it.
So what happens if they keep bombing Israel? What happens if their capabilities don't get eroded and the US pulls out and they keep bombing Israel to ensure it never happens again? What could Israel do next?
It presupposes that we can disengage. See, I don't think Mr. Trump has had this conversation with Mr. Netanyahu, because without us, Israel is going to have a tough time surviving. This is a world-changing event in the Gulf. Sykes-Picot is over. Everyone's had it. And the Muslim people who live in all of these countries have had it, even if they're elites who are wealthy and enjoying the good life don't necessarily agree with them. The truth is the vast majority of Muslims, Arab, Turks, and Persians have had it. So the old Sykes-Picot arrangement is dead. So what's going to happen? I don't think we can just arbitrarily disengage. We're going to have to come to terms of some kind. And I think we know what those terms are. Iran is going to say, America out of the Gulf. And I don't think that the people that are living in the Gulf by the time this happens will object to that, because they now know we cannot protect them. Have you been protected by the United States Armed Forces? No, we can't do it. We cannot protect them. We can't even protect Israel, although we're doubling down on trying to do that with everything that we've got. By the way, if you're in the GCC, you're watching where all the missiles are going, where all the radars are going, and the assistance. It's all going to Israel. It's not going to them. So what are we going to say? Are we going to say, no, we're going to stay in Israel, or excuse me, we're going to stay in the Gulf in perpetuity, and you just keep on bombing? I don't think so. Remember, there is this entity out there called the American people, the American electorate. They're not interested.
Yeah.
They don't want to stay there. They don't buy into this. What about the rest of the world? I mean, even if everything stopped right now, how long would it take to get the oil back online?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Very important point.
This is going to take a long time. We've done in many cases not just months of damage, but years of damage to our friends and to the Iranians. So I think we're going to have to face something. We're going to get a term like that: get out of the Gulf. So who's going to preserve access to the Persian Gulf? Well, the United States Navy hasn't done that. Do you think the United States Navy is going to sail into the Gulf right now with precision-guided missiles and drones and everything else? They'd be foolish and stupid to do so. Every time it looks like they're threatened, what do we do with the Navy? We sail away, hopefully out of range. I mean, naval forces are vulnerable. We're not stupid. We know that. So how do you handle the Persian Gulf and the Straits of Hormuz? I think you eventually have to settle on an international treaty that is guaranteed by China and Russia and India and Japan and Korea and the United States. In other words, we all agree that this is an international waterway. No one can block it. No one will block it. Eventually, we'll have to do something like that. So what else are we going to have to do? What about Mr. Netanyahu and his government? Is Iran going to stop fighting just because we tell them we don't want to fight anymore? Or are they going to say, we're not going to live with an Israel that's governed by this man Netanyahu and his party? We want regime change in Israel. What are we going to do about that? I mean, listen, this is where we're headed right now, Mario.